Great. Thank you. So we are recording this webinar. This will be posted after the presentation once we get set. So we are, I'll wave, we're Alyssa Dre, but we're actually 376 Roberts Hall. So you can see us, we're just doing a video for a short time and we'll turn that off so we can focus on the slides. But do want to welcome you here to CC 101. We're going to move right along. So you might, let's see if this works here.
For the record, I'm Sarah Dayton.
Yes,
and I'm
please.
Paul O'Connor.
So we don't even need slides since we have the video. Would you two like to introduce yourselves, please? My wonderful co-presenters today.
Sarah Dayton, Assistant Director of Extension.
And Paul O'Connor, another Assistant Director of Cooperative Extension.
And I'm also going to see if Eduardo Gonzales will be joining us also. Do a check on Eduardo and we'll be sure and elevate him as co-host once we get him on the line. So he'll be joining us a little bit later. Great. Okay. Move my slide ahead. All right. So as we said, Sarah Dayton is here. I am Kim Fleming, Professional Development and Volunteer Involvement Specialist. So coordinating the new staff orientation is one of the best parts of my position, because we love to meet new staff coming in and introduce you to a wonderful organization. And that's basically our goal today, is just to give you some awareness of some of the opportunities that are out there for you, a little bit about our history and our structure and how we work with you. So you're in for a treat. We do plan to have the webinar until 12 noon, so hope you can hang on there. But again, we are recording, so we will be posting this. We'll look for lots of interaction, so please join us in the chat. Many of you have found that and have introduced yourself. So if you're chatting to everyone, everybody can see your entries and know who's actually on the line. I'm hearing a little bit of sound here. Double check on that. Should have everybody.
Unmuted.
There you go.
Is it better? How's that? Thank you. Okay, now we have sound and the agenda. Awesome. I apologize. A little bit of everything is new here, I guess. Although we've been doing webinars for several years now, this should be really old hat. So sorry about that. So the agenda today, again, Sarah will give our welcome to CC, the official welcome on behalf of the director. I'll talk a little bit about professional development opportunities, how to succeed in your new position, assuming that you are new. I saw a lot of newbies on the line. Paul's going to talk about history and structure and governance of Cornell Cooperative Extension statewide, and then share a little bit about shared business networks. Are we okay? Oh, okay. We don't have our video on, so do we?
No,
our video's on.
No, but we can put it back on.
It doesn't
go.
And as long as you can hear us okay, we can keep that on also. Sarah will be talking a little bit about program definition and standards, which is going to help give you a little bit of guidance if you haven't seen this information already in your role as you move on to make decisions in your work. And then Eduardo will wrap up the program this morning with commitment to diversity, inclusion, and equal opportunity. So I think it's a really fun agenda, and I really appreciate my colleagues here in Roberts Hall. We are in Roberts Hall and also in New York City if Eduardo comes back from his fire drill. Appreciate you all being part of this. Are we okay with sound still?
I have one person who's just seeing a white screen with the conversation on the left. But I think it's just seems to be one individual, and I'm not sure how to help them, so I'm really sorry.
Okay. And no agenda there.
So, okay. I would keep going.
Yeah, we'll move along and see if we can yes, to slides. It looks like most people are seeing it. It may be worth logging in again. Log out and log in and jump in again. Okay, so I was just going to start with a little bit about the online course. This is our Moodle course. Lots of information in there. Remember, this is basically covering 3 different events, and the information in there is meant to help you and for you to spend time on the information that's most relevant to you in your positions. So feel free to go in. As I said, 35, 40 of you have been in, which is a record for new staff jumping into the online Moodle. There's information there for today's webinar. So you can go back and review if you haven't already. Really appreciate the introductions. I haven't been able to reply to everybody. A lot of activity, but we do appreciate that. And then the related resources. And I noticed your explorations of the website, it was interesting based on your positions, the different links that you selected, whether it was a staff site or the public site or Division of Nutritional Sciences or community development, community and economic development links, but many different, we asked you to highlight 2 sources that would be useful to you. We do hope that that staff site is a key to you also, because that's how we communicate, especially with our association staff. And I should clarify that some of you are actually association staff, some of you are Cornell University staff that are registered for today's webinar. So we've got resources for all of you. Some of the things we talk about today might be a little specific to one or the other, and we'll clarify that. But the resources here are what's useful to you. This is just the basic introduction page of the Moodle. And then I'm going to advance the slide again, so hopefully you're seeing that. These are the 3 different categories in the Moodle setup. It's a toggle switch, so when you're ready for 101, you can click that and open up the course. Same thing with 102, click that, open up the course. And then for those of you who are joining us next week, September 12th, 13th, 14th, I think I've got 24 registered now. This is the 3-day new staff orientation on campus, which builds on these webinars. So we hope that people will go through all that material, and will be more of a connection here on campus with faculty and assistant directors. Lots of great things that are happening. We'll do some grant writing. So these are specific on-campus events that some people have managed to get registered, work with your supervisor if you're interested. Registration for that one is now closed, but we also have a 2-day new staff orientation for those of you that are working in program delivery or operations positions, and that registration is still open. So you'll see all that information on the staff site if you haven't registered for that. Again, we really appreciate all of the interest in all of our events and offerings. I just wanted to do a quick little introduction to Cornell University. That's where Extension Administration sits here at Cornell. You'll find lots of facts there on the website, and there's links in the slides. Again, the handouts are available on the Moodle as of yesterday. But Cornell is ranked number 14 in the world. Each year it's going up or down, and there are a lot of increases this year. And so I was looking at the various articles. So lots of great happenings with graduate school, also undergrad programs. Engineering graduate programs always seem to be highly rated, and also the architectural program was recognized. So many different sources, many different articles that have been highlighted on this page under facts. We also included some of the facts on that link, also include how many students are involved and how many staff. And I'll just pull out some of those numbers for you to let you know that we do have about, the student enrollment is about 14,000 undergrads with about 7,500 graduate or professional students. So really big campus here, and of course there's several different campuses. So there's one in Qatar. There's also one, the Cornell Tech campus, that's in New York City, which is the latest addition, and of course the 14 colleges and schools that are here on the Cornell campus. So just wanted to give you a little touch of Cornell University and welcome you to visit, and of course you'll be connecting through your position. Okay, and a little glimpse of Martha Van Rensselaer Hall, and this is the home to the College of Human Ecology. The College of Human Ecology uses translational research model to link social and behavioral science research to extension. On their website, and that was also listed in the Moodle, you'll connect to many of the resources and departments that are there. And again, depending on your position, if it's a program position, and if it's related to human ecology, you'll make many connections there. Some of Extension Administration is also in Martha Van Rensselaer. And then this is the agricultural quad. Actually, we'll need a new picture now because we've been doing some renovation here at Cornell, and it looks a little bit different. Very exciting. This is the College of Ag and Life Sciences. We are actually in Roberts Hall, which is there at the top of the quad. We're on the 3rd floor in Roberts Hall, or most of us in Extension Administration are. The Dean of the College of Ag and Life Sciences is on the 2nd floor in Roberts Hall also. So we consider this the hub of Extension Administration, although we know and recognize that Extension Administration is really spread out all over the place. Okay, and part of our virtual world, we'll talk much more about this on Friday in CC 102, is the communication world and our virtual world. This is just a glimpse of the CC public homepage, and many of you recognize that as a key resource for you. This is really a resource for the communities that we work with throughout New York State, and also shows some of our connections to social media. And then the staff site, I'm sure you've all seen this, and again, many recognize this as a key. This is the landing page. It's in process, so it's being developed a little bit further right now. It's a list of the Extension Insider newsletter and professional development opportunities every week, so you can look back at the past issues if you haven't seen this before. And I think some of you have actually been featured in this, so go back and look for yourselves. And you'll also see the upcoming webinars, such as new staff orientation in the list, also campus county connections, many other resources. One other site that you can get to from this staff site is the Business Systems Launchpad. Just want to give you a picture of that. This may look a little bit different on your computer, depending on what programs you work with. But we did want to make sure this was mentioned, and again, it'll come up again on Friday in CC 102. So just some very, very brief glimpse of our world, whether it's virtual or here on campus or across the state. Wanted to make sure that introduction is there for you. I want to welcome everybody to put their questions in the chat. We're keeping an eye on that. Hopefully everyone can see the slides advancing again. And before we move on to the director's welcome by Sarah, we'll be sure and take your questions and answers. Questions and answers. So feel free to make comments if you'd like, right into the chat. And then we'll go on from there. But feel free to take time to put your question together. We'll take those and fit those on. I don't think we missed anything. Looks like we got Maureen Russell back. That's fantastic. And seeing the slides, hopefully.
So am I going to need to use this guy?
Will.
Okay. So we'll watch for questions. Again, I'm Sarah Dayton. Good morning. And I'm here in lieu of Chris Watkins, and I deeply apologize for that because he's way more fun than I am. He's down in New York City visiting the New York City office and doing a couple things down there. But we should be connecting with him when you're on campus, which will be awesome. So one of the things that Chris really likes us to share is that the Cornell Cooperative Extension System is really a lot of things. And it's one of those types of organizations that, depending on where someone comes into it, they sort of see one facet of the organization when there's really a huge organization. It's an educational system. The purpose of Cornell Cooperative Extension is to extend the research of the university. And that's the most tightly perceived mission of Extension. As you get to know your association, or some of you have been here for a little while, you will see that sometimes we're connecting with other universities or other organizations, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the primary purpose of a land-grant university and their extension system is to extend and connect the work that's being done at the university to the people in the state, and at the same time be listening to the people in the state and work that back into the research that's done at the university. So there is a partnership between federal, state, and local governments. Very practical. The idea is that the work that we all do across the state is solving problems or identifying opportunities and getting a community ready to take advantage of that opportunity. And it's very much locally rooted. Our best functioning system, our best days are when we are connected with local citizens and making sure that we're hearing what they're saying and what they're seeing, and building that back into the programs that we do, and again, feeding back into the university. It's really very comprehensive, and as you know, and other people will address, there are multiple program areas, and for Cornell Cooperative Extension, there's really very few areas that there isn't some connection that we can have to something going on in your community. It should be research-based, so this is coming up from the research and evidence-based programs, not just something somebody locally wanted to do and it just seems like a good idea and take off with it, but that there's a basis of research for the work that we do, making sure it connects. Highly extensive, wonderful programs throughout the state, 54 counties, the 5 boroughs of New York City. We do programming in all of these areas, and it's really integrated. It's a network of professionals, campus-based faculty and staff. We have regional specialists, both county-based and Cornell University-based, and then of course our county-based educators and professional employees. It's important, it's really important for us to understand, all of us, that we're connected at the federal level with NIFA. USDA is often the way people might say it, but we are connected by USDA. That's where one of the primary sources of funding that we get for the entire system comes through. It comes to the university. We are connected, as Kim mentioned, we have both CALS, College of Ag and Life Science, and Human Ecology that are deeply connected. We're also connected with the entire university, but definitely a much smaller percentage of our work is done with the other colleges at the university. We have our New York City office, which is headed by Jen Tiffany. That New York City office is actually part of the university, as opposed to the associations are distinct entities on their own. Chris Watkins, as you know, is the director of the system and provides leadership for statewide extension, and makes decisions about how to allocate the Smith-Lever funds that we get. Some of it goes to faculty to fund research in areas that are of importance to our cooperative extension system. In other places, money is sent out to the associations to help do the work that they're doing. And then, of course, it has to fund the work that's done by Extension Administration. And as you can see on the left side of the slide, the connection to the New York State Ag Experiment Station and the Cornell University Ag Experiment Station. Cornell University Ag Experiment Station is based here at the university, and the New York State Ag Experiment Station is up in Geneva, New York, where there's a lot of research going on. So All right. As you join the extension, one of the things that's will become quickly apparent to you is that we rely on multiple sources of funding. Over time, this organization has grown. I think probably 30 years ago, most associations just relied on that federal money and the local county appropriation, money that the county proper would give to the extension association to do their work. But as times have gotten tighter and we don't have as many funds as we used to, associations have become entrepreneurial, they have been creative, they've gone out for grant funding, contracts to do certain programs, and so it creates a more complex environment. Each association has a local board of directors, and they provide the direction for the organization, program assessment. They have overall fiduciary or financial responsibility, which is a very serious responsibility that your board has. On the other side, you have your county legislature, which provides an appropriation to help provide the base funding for your organization, and highly important. Of course, your association provide the educational funding. I want to go back. We have the federal level, then we have the state level. That's that state funding 224, County Law 224. County Law 224 requires that there's local county appropriations. So that's the county legislatures that I just talked about. But we can't get the federal funding unless we get that County Law 224 funding, and you can't get the County Law 224 funding unless you get that local appropriation. So it's a very tightly tied system. All pieces have to be working. And of course, it results in amazing programs, both local and regional programs, and at the bottom, extraordinary volunteer support across the state. Probably the big programs are our Master Gardener program and our 4-H programs, but there are volunteers in every program area, and it is a massive source of pride and a massive source of resource for our organization. So it's really a key thing here to understand is what that county-based system means. That appropriation, the funds that are put into the budget of your local county, make it possible again to get state funds, and then the state funds make it possible to get federal funds. But this also means there's a lot of influence on the types of programs that you do from that local county. And of course, we're always listening to our community residents and making sure that we're with the resources that we have available to us, making sure that we can do programs that are locally relevant. And again, that volunteer base is really important to you. One is to run the programs, but they also are your ambassadors to your county legislators, talking about the good programs that you do and how the money is used effectively. It's really, so I've visited a couple of states, not many, and I've certainly been to conferences where I've talked to other states about the extension program that they have in their state. Chris Watkins, of course, has traveled much more broadly across the United States and is much more familiar, as well as he is from New Zealand and knew the extension system in New Zealand, which is very different. And it's really nice to say, there's lots of times where we'll talk about the differences among systems, and we'll talk about how there's sometimes quirks with our system that make it difficult to do our work. Other times it makes us in a really strong position. I think both Chris and I'll echo it, New York State extension system is probably it's certainly one of the strongest systems as far as strength in the programs that we provide. But as far as a unique and wonderful system, we clearly think it's probably it is the most wonderful system in the country. Because of that state, local, and federal tie, it puts us in a very different position than other organizations across the country. We have staff in each county that are tied to that county. In most of the states across the country, they're employed by the university. The university dictates what programming will be done. And of course, they're trying to listen to the local communities, but our structure really facilitates much better ground up communication about the concerns that people have out there and the things that they see as high needs. So our state in general, the programs are more nimble than what you will see across the country. So a point of pride for us. We also have a tremendous faculty base that's part of the fabric of Cal's and Human Ecology. These are both top colleges in the country for the work that they do. And Chris will give the shout out to the staff here in Extension Administration. Just a lot of really dedicated people trying to make sure that you have what you need. It doesn't mean we don't have the occasional bump in trying to get things done, but we are dedicated up here to supporting you in the work that you do. And we always want to hear if there's something you see that we can do differently or you need something, please let us know. Don't suffer in silence. If we don't know it, we can't address it. Truly dedicated people in all program areas and support positions up here. So one of the things that we always want to be thinking about, and this is where your newness to the system is really important. We're always thinking about planning for the future. How can we demonstrate value to our communities? How do we help people get information? And I think especially coming from different organizations, maybe a few of you are fresh out of college. Some of you might have had 1 or 2 jobs and you have a little more experience, but you have experience in other organizations. Use your newness to share ideas that you have, to see how we're doing things here in Extension, either at your local association level or in your regional team, or us as a system, and provide that feedback, those ideas that you have, but while also looking at how things are done here, what works, what could be tried differently. We have a tremendous amount of applied research and extension, of course, and it's important to make sure that the value of extension is easily demonstrated to our communities, because remember, those are taxpayers who pay those dollars collected by the county that the county appropriates to us. So we need to be able to demonstrate our value. That's a fair deal for the work that we do and the money that we receive from our various funders. We realize that the needs of our communities are changing, and especially millennials, as they're basically flooding into the workforce. They have different ideas, they have different approaches, and wherever we are on the spectrum of how long we've been in the workforce, listening to each other and trying to benefit from what we're hearing from our newer employees is really important. It's also affecting how people want to hear their program. One of the things we're hearing more and more is, do you have any podcasts? Can I view this on my cell phone? Can I connect with you on my cell phone? All of us, even us, those of us who have been with the system longer or in the workforce longer, those are changing the way that we work and connect with people as well. But definitely connecting with millennial generation and thinking about that is highly important. The other thing that we need to do as a system is really be thinking about the needs of a diverse audience. Traditionally, Extension in New York State has been white, largely focused on white farmers, because that was the history of farming in New York State. It wasn't an issue of necessarily discrimination, but simply who put this organization together. At the same time, we need to be mindful that our communities are changing. If I'm not mistaken, the generation of babies being born right now is pretty much in the neighborhood of 50-50 of diverse, what we think of now as minorities, and whites. Our world is changing, and those people will be in 4-H in 6 years. This is going to change our programs, and we need to be mindful of that. We just went through a civil rights review here on campus, and then of the 4-H program across the state. Several counties were visited, and we got some good feedback from our federal partners that we'll be working on. So something to be thinking about, especially if you have experience with those audiences, help us think differently about connecting with them in things that we might not be doing as well as we could right now. The other thing that Chris brings up is connecting with people or organizations that dislike us for what we represent. And this is all sorts of things. It's interesting, there have been studies done across the state, and oftentimes cooperative extension will be better known to residents across New York State than Cornell University. And that is kudos to your system. Kudos to all of our associations and the connections that you have in counties. Sometimes that connection with Cornell is, ooh, it's a bunch of people sitting in their ivory tower. They don't know how the real world works. Sometimes, I think one that Chris brings up is the relationship with Monsanto. There are places where Monsanto is funding research, but we're not running on Monsanto money. And sometimes people think that we are, because they'll hear that there's a contract or a grant connected with a certain company or organization that they are uncomfortable with. So rather than being uncomfortable with that, courteously engaging with it, hearing from other people their side of it, and helping address misperceptions where we can. Lost my ability. Oh, oops, okay. So as I mentioned, 30 years ago, most associations were entirely funded by those county appropriations you see at the roots. That's really our foundational funding at this point. The capacity funding is our federal funding, so that was helping the structure of the organization. Now, much more in grants, contracts for specific services. There may be fees that you collect for your programs. It's appropriate as long as it's at a reasonable level. And oftentimes you'll see that your association receives gifts or donations from various organizations. And sometimes they're small. It might be $5 or $10. In other places, we've had $1 million donations. It of course depends on who's out there and what opportunities they have and want to offer to Extension. I lose my, I think I lost it. I've lost my battery power. Okay, and you'll see your state of pursuit. Nope, I'm all good. I'm all good. So we're at the tail end of our current strategic plan, which is available on the website. The core pieces of that strategic initiative are building better university community engagement, core programming, funding for core programming, regional networks, and resource stability. And each of these things we've worked on for the last 5 years. We've had various types of success, and there's some that we found we couldn't go as far as we anticipated, but it got us to a better place. So in your local association, it might be a question to bring up as a discussion item. I think I'm probably close to the end of my time, so I have to keep going. We are getting ready right now. We've been for most of the last year working on a new strategic plan. And no, these are along the previous system priorities of really looking at barriers to regional sharing and incentivizing working together, which we've been successful on. A lot of investment in professional development, and if you're interested in further courses or opportunities to go to conferences and you're looking for funding, Kim Fleming, who's sitting across from the table from me, is the chair of that committee, and a good person to connect with to find out what type of funding might be available for the things that you're interested in. Certainly at the local level, there's professional development opportunities and funding potentially. And then there are organizations like ESP, which I think I'm going to turn back to Kim when we talk about that. And then from Extension Administration, there has been support of association programming, and we're attempting to do that more and more. I'm just going to keep going, improving communication. We've definitely worked hard to engage new faculty in our system and involve them in our programming, and increasing opportunities for student engagement. And one of the places that you may hear about this is the Engage Cornell initiative that's here on campus. I'm the liaison between Cooperative Extension Administration and the university for this particular program. We've had a number of interns be deployed to the associations as part of this Engage Cornell. And definitely I would encourage you to look at the Engage Cornell website, and as you're looking forward at the opportunities that might be of interest to you, thinking about how to put together a project and make a request for an intern through the Engage Cornell project. We have a new Cornell University president, Martha Pollack. She's now our 14th president of the university. Background in consumer science, information science, and linguistics, a little bit different than our experience with the previous presidents, but she's been very interested in reaching out to Chris Watkins, the director, so this is a good thing. She also comes from a land-grant university, of course, which is helpful. And as I started to mention earlier, we are working on a new strategic plan. This will be launched later this year in December for executive directors at the Executive Leadership Conference. We started with a broad approach to get input from all of our association staff people, as well as on campus. Did some polling with the executive directors across the state. We had all of the associations do a SWOT analysis, as well as we did them for all of our units here on campus. And then then there was a system survey, which we collected data from, or at least offered the opportunity to collect data from all staff throughout the system. And all of this data has been collected and being analyzed right now. We have a draft plan right now that will be sent out to a small group of people for review, and then, as I said, launched later this year. There's going to be opportunities to be involved in a focus or work group going forward, so you may want to watch for those if you have a particular interest in some of the topics that will be coming up out of the strategic plan. Please don't hesitate just because you're new. I would say if you see something that interests you, dive in. It would be a really good opportunity. So I'm going to pause here and just offer an opportunity if you have any questions about anything that I talked about. And I'm trying to look at the time and see how we're doing.
We're good.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay. So any questions from anyone about the slides that I just presented for Chris? All right. Let me send this back to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate that. It's a real lot of information in a few slides. So good information there. So hopefully people are tuned in and excited and writing down the opportunities that Sarah has mentioned, so you can find out more as we go along or after the webinar is over. So Sarah talked about a few things as we go into the next piece, and I'll promise this is just a quick commercial call. So we do have a very carefully timed agenda that we are very flexible about also. So with our startup being a little delayed, we're all good. So I'm going to talk about succeeding in your new position. And as I said, Sarah mentioned the professional development that's happening out in your communities, also professional development that is offered here by Extension Administration. And as I mentioned, we're part of the organizational development team. Sarah's our lead on that. Eduardo's part of the team also. And in the next couple of webinars, you'll be meeting Celeste Carmichael and a few others. But we also think of Extension Administration as our full professional development team. So Paul O'Connor, who's here at the table, many other colleagues who will be joining us on Friday, and beyond that in Extension Administration, really part of the team that helps support you in as you're getting to know Cooperative Extension and also your roles and succeeding further in your roles. So I'm just going to share a few little things that are on the slides. Again, you can go back to them. And you can always contact me. You've got my email. I've been sending notes to everyone who's registered. But this may look familiar because it should be in each and every one of your position descriptions, the skills for success. Maybe not quite looking at this, but this is the slide view. And these are actually skills that apply to every position that's here at Cornell University. These were created here at Cornell University. And we have, I guess, adopted or extended those to Cornell Cooperative Extension staff, and feel that these are essential skills for individuals and organizational success. So when we're thinking about ourselves as professionals, or even our teams or people we supervise, are we exhibiting these important skills? And maybe we need to pursue something to get more information on being more inclusive, or really being able to succeed and work with teams. Or maybe it's how do I continue to self-develop now that I have a new job and want to pursue some skills, or even it's communication skills. So these are just a quick snapshot of some of those important skills for individuals and also for organizational success. So we want to highlight that. And again, you can find these in your position description. And we do plan our our professional development offerings, we think about new staff orientation and think about these essential skills, build that in. This is a framework. It's kind of a big grid that looks like it has a lot of words on there, but basically 5 different categories that we think are important for organizational development and professional success. So the 5 different categories being achievement and initiative. What are you coming into the organization with? Are you motivated? Are you self-aware? Do you have those important credentials that match your position? The communication leadership skills that are so crucial in Cornell Cooperative Extension, and also the foundation, which is a big part of new staff orientation, making sure you've got that history and the legal foundation of new staff. And then program development, of course, is very crucial. You'll notice the top line across is diversity awareness, effectively engaging others, inclusiveness, recruiting and retaining diversity. We put a big focus on this in our new staff orientation and in our professional development efforts. And again, we're going to wrap up with Eduardo at the end, but really want to highlight our focus on diversity and inclusiveness in the system. We also have a column on research skills, so thinking about considering diversity as we're tied in with research here on the campus, understanding basic research skills, and also thinking about how to find credible information on the internet. So those are just some of the skills that we had identified, and also relates to a few different studies that have been done through Extension and featured. We find our priorities also match the studies that have been shared. So that's a little bit about our organizational development, professional development framework there. Again, it's to help you think about where do I need to go to think about being well-rounded in cooperative extension, or to meet some of the skills that I need in my position that I don't feel so strong about, or that I really want to develop further. So. And then the individual learning plan, another way to think about what are my learning needs as you're getting into your new position, working with your supervisor, and also identifying the kinds of learning experience. This is actually tied with scholarship offerings we have here. We have some scholarship offerings for program staff to pursue master's degree. We also have a few other non-designated funds that we're able to also support your professional development. Sometimes it's conferences, but again, I'm the contact for that. So if you've got an idea and are interested, you can contact me and we can talk more about the opportunities. It's filling out a form and it's sending the information to a committee for approval or not. It doesn't happen overnight, so plan ahead and give me a call if you're thinking about looking for scholarships or looking for professional development funds. So that's my quick commercial on professional development opportunities to keep us on schedule. But I do want to be sure that the chat is working. So Sarah also mentioned professional development organizations. So she talked about Epsilon Sigma Phi. There's also the New York State Association of Cornell Cooperative Extension 4-H educators. So I'm wondering if in the chat, if anybody has been encouraged to join a professional development organization, what organization they may have joined, just to be sure that that encouragement is happening statewide. There's also the county ag educators and also the family consumer science. I believe there's also a national research or a natural resource or environmental organization that's happening statewide that's tied to extension. So has anybody out there been encouraged to join one of those organizations? I hope we didn't click the chat off on people.
I don't know. I just sent the message out, just checking.
Working for you?
Yeah.
And if you want to respond to everyone, we'll see that, or you can also respond to the host. Oh, good. Thank you, Mike. And Mike's one of the new staff members who came in to talk with us. So I'm thinking maybe I might have been one of the few people, Mike, that encouraged you to join a professional development organization, especially as a new staff. This is a place to connect in with those organizations, connect in with staff that can help you with your work. And also we've got Maureen, who joined the 4-H Educator Association. That was my roots. That's first place I started and found much support with that organization. So this is fantastic. Thank you very much. You can keep chatting that in if you'd like, but I'm going to turn it over to Paul O'Connor, who's going to talk about history, structure, and governance. So let's see if that works for you. We turn over the
let's try.
slide forward.
How about
There
that?
you go.
It's amazing when technology works, isn't it? And we'll try that out with a video in just a minute here.
Yeah.
So again, Paul O'Connor, another assistant director here with Cooperative Extension Administration. So this presentation, we're trying something a little different, which is this video that we're going to get to in a second here. You're going to notice some duplication here, and that's very much intentional. We're trying to do a little deeper dive on some of the key parts, but also tie it back to why is it that way? How did we get there? And you'll see that a few different times. But the basics of things are that back in 1862, Senator from Vermont, who is Justin Morrill, put through some legislation. Kim's having fun playing tic-tac-toe. No, I'm just kidding. She's getting things queued up here for the video. 1862, Senator Justin Morrill passed the Morrill Act, which really is the founding legislation at the national level for cooperative extension. That act was signed by, at the time, the president was Abraham Lincoln. If you remember your history, it's right after the Civil War. Lots of change going on. And if folks had just tuned in and heard me say lots of change going on, they might have thought I was talking about current events. So even though it's 100 years old plus, it's still absolutely relevant today. And so the idea there behind that legislation is, here we've got these, at that point in time, very much elite universities, very much traditional classical type educations in a country in need of practical education. And so the federal government put together this legislation that said we're going to give states the opportunity to get some quote free land from the federal government, and the strings attached where you can sell that land, but you've got to use that money to start a new type of university, something that provides practical education for folks in the nation. And so with that as a little bit of a backdrop, we've got this contemporary video that was produced 4 or 5 years ago, but very much up to date. At the time, Robert Harrison was the chairman of the board of trustees here at Cornell University and does a fantastic job of narrating this. It's a really short video. If all goes well, we're going to show you here. So lights, camera, action, and Kim will click away.
Let's see what happens.
Class research institution that valued scholarship and teaching as well as research. But the second part was the notion of applying the results of that research to help people in the real world. And I think that duality has become part of our identity, it's become part of our DNA, it's become part of our spirit.
The land-grant mission was born in the post-Civil War Reconstruction era. Our nation needed universities that would educate more citizens and would educate them to address the very real problems of society. Of the land grant idea, the idea that began with Morrill in the time of Abraham Lincoln and the idea that continues today, is that what we do in our laboratories and classrooms in this excellent university matters to the world. And what happens in the world should matter and influence what goes on at this university.
I think it's important to appreciate that the land-grant mission of the university has become such a success through the work of many of our colleges over many, many years now, nearly 150, that we were in a position to expand it from New York State, which was originally the focus, to literally the world.
While it used to be the case that people would focus on local issues or solutions, it's just a reality of this century that we cannot separate the local from the global anymore.
I think there's a misconception in how people think about what a land-grant university is. Some people think that we have land-grant colleges, and in fact, that's not true. Our university is a land-grant university, and every department, every discipline, every area, major, and college has the same obligation, the same public service mission.
The words land grant represent an idea that has changed throughout our history to meet the contemporary needs of that moment. Public engagement describes in more contemporary terms what we're about now.
Public engagement for Cornell means rolling up our sleeves, getting out in the real world, and addressing some of the most important problems that people around the world are facing.
The way that public engagement shows up around the university is going to be various. How this looks in the humanities and the performing arts versus planning and design and engineering and the health sciences, those are all going to look different.
For example, Cornell scientists have figured out how to improve nutritional value of certain vital crops, both grown in New York State and around the world. They've been able to address the mosquito problem and therefore the malaria problem in Ghana, and they've been able to deliver water purification systems in Central America to help people have clean, safe drinking water.
An amazing program in the city of Buffalo, working with NGOs to strengthen their capacity to meet the needs of that city.
Breastfeeding promotion programs in Bangladesh, all kinds of programs out of the engineering school to work with NASA.
The diagnosis and surveillance of diseases that move from animals to humans, like West Nile virus.
Educating prisoners in Auburn, New York.
There's a lot of work going on with alternative energy.
Creating a clinic in Haiti to deliver treatment to patients with HIV/AIDS.
Our extension activities and our relationships with the counties of New York. Health systems and the hospitality industry coming together in new ways to meet the needs of people living with an illness.
The New York City Tech Campus, where the city of New York chose Cornell to be its partner to construct a transformative campus that will impact not just New York City, but literally the world.
Technology, discovery from the university moves out into the world. People from the world and ideas from the world and knowledge from the world move into the university.
It's really a two-way street. On the one hand, we certainly are able to deliver solutions into the field because we have done great work in our laboratories. But on the other hand, we're able to learn from what happens in the field and bring that back to the Cornell campus to include in future research and future curriculum. Grant University, in particular one as prominent as us, only one of two private land-grant institutions in the country and the only land-grant institution in the Ivy League, is a tremendous competitive advantage for Cornell. We are able to, number one, address the world's problems in a way that many other universities are not, but number two, we're able to attract students who understand that. They appreciate that by coming to a place like Cornell, they are able to address meaningfully and immediately the great challenges that the world faces.
The problems have changed. Society has certainly changed. Our students have changed. Our ways of educating have changed. But the idea that universities should exist in part to engage the needs of society, to include society broadly, and to be relevant to current trends is exactly the idea of Cornell University pursuing its engagement mission today.
Thanks, Kim, for handling the technology, and boy, another success on the IT end. That's great. So as we go through, and for those that might be watching the clock and looking at agenda things, we'll scoot through SBN really quickly. So we'll catch right up here. So as we do a few more slides and highlight things, use the chat box to tell us what you thought. We'll wait to see if we can click here. There we go. What you think of that video, or if you had questions about, boy, I didn't understand that, we'll either hit them here or follow up afterwards. So 3 years after the Morale Act was signed into law, Cornell University was incorporated back in 1865. And so a few attributes, Kim mentioned, the current day at the very beginning of the webinar, fully private, very, strong private university with what we would call now world-class research, and yet also fully land grant with this public mission of practical education. Very much classical type of research and things like engineering and mathematics and such, and yet 4 colleges that are very much public, with the College of Ag and Life Science, the College of Human Ecology, the Vet School, and Industrial Labor Relations. Coeducational, non-sectarian, and yet here's Ezra Cornell stating, any person, any study. Those are the attributes in the resource you have at your fingertips. So the clicker maybe isn't working. We're trying to figure that out. Thanks, Kim. No, it doesn't seem to. So we're working on it here. There we go. So we've heard this idea. That's maybe one slide too far, I think. Let's try and see if we can back up one. Maybe not. Just leave it there. That's fine.
That go to the head.
And I'll catch it up here. Is that we've heard about this kind of, you might think, a push and a pull between, what are we talking about here? We're going to bring research out to people, and yet we're going to use the needs of communities to inform that research. Well, that's based on 2 of the gentlemen who really put the National Cooperative Extension program together. And that's Seaman Knapp, who was actually born in Essex County in the northeast part of the state, way up by Lake Placid. Mr. Knapp was a professor, he was an administrator, he was a farmer, worked for the United States Department of Agriculture in the South, and he really had this vision that cooperative extension should be about taking the ivory tower research and demonstrating it on demonstration farms and in clubs. We call those 4-H clubs in this day and age, but take it from the campus out to communities. And at the same point, we had Liberty Hyde Bailey, who is born in the backwoods on a farm in Michigan, had a view of extension as being something that should be more like grassroots and community driven, where people know what they need, and if they're invested in that at the grassroots level, they're more apt to put the information into practice. So lots of overlap between these 2 gentlemen that really put cooperative extension together, and yet that's still what we're about, is this 2-way street of things, research coming from, in this state, Cornell University, out to communities, and yet the community needs, as Sarah talked about, informing the research that goes on. So this expert model and this community-driven model coming together, and that nexus really is all of you. It's the educators that are out there, whether you're in a local association or in a regional or statewide program. That's kind of the nexus of what this was all about. But then this slide, what about cooperative extension in this state? Sarah covered in Chris's presentation. It looks different in every other state in the nation except here in New York, where home rule really comes a lot into play. That there's this thing called County Law 224 that we're going to get into in a minute, where we've got the federal legislation, but in New York State, there's a state law that governs how cooperative extension is to function. A couple of quick take-homes there. We're clearly not part of county government. You're not, you may sit in a county-owned facility, the office may be there, but you're not a county employee. We are tied to Cornell University. That's the research. There's a lot about administration that we're going to get into a little more, but we're clearly not a part specifically of Cornell University, not a Cornell type of employee. There are a few folks where that doesn't apply that are on the call, but for the most part, we're not directly a part of Cornell University. So let's get into how does this really work, and we'll come back to this idea of extension administration and standards. So let's try this clicker first, shall we, Kim? That didn't work.
Now try.
There we go. How about that? So what about the program and beyond some of this history? Well, when it first started and folks started to implement this land grant, there really were three buckets or circles of needs. There were the farms had needs, very technical needs, how to grow the crops, soils, climate, etc. And out of that, there were these bureaus of farms, farm bureaus that sprang up. There were needs back in the homesteads, and so there was a lot of programming around, how to manage family finances and the like. And then let's not forget about the future with our youth. There were needs around that, which we now call 4-H clubs. That's how these different perspectives and different needs came to be back in the day with the different programs. The key there, and you'll still feel some remnants of this, is that they really were almost three separate silos. They had their own focuses, their own funding, and really operated separately. Okay, I'm going to need a little help with the...
So chat versus clicker.
I see.
issue.
There we go. We're getting
We
it.
got it now.
And yet, in the early 1900s, the County Law 224 was formed, and that allowed for the formation of associations. So just interesting, we won't go through all of this, but most of the associations are plus or minus 100 years old. And yet, just as recently, maybe, beyond recent for some folks, in 1975, Hamilton was the last county, all 56 counties are up there, has an association of cooperative extension based out of their county. So that's where these three different areas of farm bureaus, home bureaus, and 4-H clubs came under one umbrella at the very local level. So today, what does that look like? You saw a lot of good pictures in Chris's presentation that Sarah gave. A couple of statistics here. There is an Office of Cooperative Extension in every single county of the state, plus the boroughs of New York City. So that's 56 counties plus New York City. All of those county-based operations are governed by a board of directors, volunteer board of directors. We'll talk a little more about that in a minute. Plus or minus somewhere around 1,500 staff, paid staff. Each year that number swells in the summer with interns and summer camp staff and the like. And a very wide diversity of programs, way too much to capture in this presentation. The frustration there isn't a list that says this, that, and the other thing are approved, and Sarah's going to talk a lot more about program standards in a minute. Another layer that we've added a lot more emphasis on in the recent years are more regional collaborations, whether they're formal or informal. So a wide contemporary portfolio of what cooperative extension is to today. And again, we'll talk a little bit more, a strong need to diversify our staff, diversify our programs, and that again is at very much a local base here. So we'll get in now for a couple of slides quickly here on County Law 224. So this is a state law. It goes beyond cooperative extension. It talks a lot about what county governments can do. But there is two sections that specifically lay out the framework for cooperative extension. And it basically says that if there is a group of citizens that want to come together, form an association under an agreement that is signed between that local county association and Cornell University, this law allows that association to exist. There's a couple of nuances that we'll go over here. So the key terms in bold within that law, a subgovernmental agency. So you're not fully government, but you're also not a charity organization either. So it operates a lot like an agency with elected board members that govern that agency. Unincorporated as a group of citizens from that county in order to form an association. So their key takeaway is that also means that we are able to qualify with the IRS to have a 501c3 tax exempt status, as long as we abide by the rules laid out in County Law 224. Those three buckets in the third bullet you'll see are now been expanded just a couple of years ago because the programming is more contemporary now, and we changed the law to allow for more programming to exist. This part was mentioned a little bit before, but the reality is that New York State enters into an agreement every year with Cornell University that Extension Administration has to provide what those standards for the form of organization, what the standards are for staffing and for programming. They are within the context of something that we here at Extension Administration have the legal oversight responsibility to do. And then the last part here is that's the quote: there can be county or regional extensions, and that's the takeaway from the County Law 224. It does also go into a funding mechanism. Sarah talked about that. I won't review it. The county provides funds that leverages the state funds and provides a framework for the other funds that Sarah talked about. So a couple of quick things about association. We've reviewed a lot of this. The one that I wanted to touch on was because we are subgovernmental means that we are subject to the state's open meetings law. Again, a public body, a public organization. So things like board meetings, like advisory committee meetings, the public has to view the conduct of those meetings. You have to have meeting minutes. We also are subject to the Freedom of Information Act, where we have to be, if we are foiled, we have to respond to that foil accordingly, and there's all kinds of regulations on that. But again, these are the framework that's based off of what happened almost 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago. So winding down to a couple more sides here, I'd call this the sweet spot slide. The idea is county governments and the citizens of the county have all kinds of needs. A lot of those we can do something about, but there also is a lot that we can't do anything about. Campus, Cornell University has a lot of resources, lots and lots of resources, and yet there are things that are just beyond what the university can do. And then we do have this structure called County Law 224 that we have to operate in. So you all are right, and we are there to support you right at the nexus of this, bringing those campus resources to apply to the needs in the county within the law of County Law 224, and also, again, bringing those needs to help inform the research at the university. When, like Sarah said, when we're doing that, it's nothing short of remarkable. It's unbelievable the programs that we have in this state. So we've talked a lot. You all are paid staff, but last slide here, it's actually 45,000 volunteers in 2016. A lot of value that our volunteers give the system. They volunteer in programs, in delivering programs, in chaperoning youth to county fair to state fair. They serve on our boards of directors. Without our volunteers, we just would not be the organization we are. So seems like a random slide, but again, lots of structure, lots of history. You're a part of a phenomenal organization that is phenomenally complicated to understand when you come in. We've tried to do our best to at least give you the framework here, and we're certainly available to support and answer any questions you have, whether it's today or afterwards. So we'll give a pause here. I got to remember to click through about questions and answers. Not hearing any, we will click to very much a different topic, but one that you at least want to highlight here. And that is, within all these great programs, we still need a business platform to operate on. There is still finance, human resource, IT concerns and needs. There is a framework to operate on within the business. what we've done in the last few years is created this thing called a shared business network. That's the map that you're seeing. The state is divided into 8 regions that were self-selected by the counties, the executive directors, and the boards of directors. The shared business networks really are here as a coordinated system that connects the local business operations with those of us in extension administration. You'll find that in your association, those that are located in an association, you're going to have local contacts within finance, HR, and IT, and sometimes they're going to be full finance staffs or HR staffs. Sometimes it's going to be part of somebody's position. They may do several other things. That's your first point of contact, is your local staff, but they are supported and oftentimes really strongly supported by what we'll call SBN staff, who are highly qualified, highly competent specialists within their fields of finance, HR, and IT. They serve to provide troubleshooting. They provide professional development. They really do a lot of brainstorming work to find solutions. And in this day and age, when systems change, they also help with that systems integration. So like when our finance system changes, the IT leads are involved with those types of things. How are they funded? Extension administration puts a lot of funding into it, $40,000 to $50,000 within each of those 8 regions. A lot of staff time here goes into supporting the shared business networks. And then each association puts in funding as well. So it's a cost share model. They're overseen by an entity called an administrative management group, which is a collection of the executive directors within each region, plus a few of us from extension administration. We approve budgets, we approve plans of work, we make connections from one association to another, again, to all make sure that the finances, the human resources, and the IT happens to support the programs that you all are involved in. So with that, the take home with shared business networks is, if you're having troubles with your benefits, you're having troubles with contracts or HR, or the stupid computer just simply won't work, start with your local folks first. They may involve the shared business network staff, and they're connected here at Extension Administration. So an overlay of layers there, but a lot of rich resources to support the programs that you do. So with that, we can again pause for a question or two, and then move right on to, I think Sarah's up next.
Yep, so me again. So I'm going to be really quick, because this is all information that will be covered in your other on-campus pieces, and your associations are highly aware of it. Recall the picture that Paul just did, where there's many, many things that the county wants, and there's many, many things that the university does, but the cooperative extension system is bounded by that County Law 224 law. So there are certain things where associations can participate in the work, and there are many things that the association cannot do. We cannot run other organizations. We cannot provide staff to other organizations. That County Law 224 is a strong guidance for us. So what we created here in Extension Administration was program definitions and standards to help guide associations when they're trying to decide what kind of work they want to do. You have all those volunteers, you have county legislators, you have the nice people that you know at the grocery store who are going to say, I have a great idea for extension. We are well known for the work that we do and outstanding work that we do, and people will often try to get us to do programs because we just do a great job, but we can't do everything. So the Cooperative Extension Program Definitions and Standards, it gives you guidance about what's in and what's out. And it's really serious to not get involved in the types of activities that are outside the boundaries. The system overall is doing a great job. In 2010, we did an audit of the system and found a number of programs had strayed outside of where we should be. in the end, some of those programs had to be ended, and some staff ended up losing their positions because the work that they were doing was not on mission. And it's very serious. It's tied to our federal and state funding and our benefit system. So this is something, if you're in charge of developing new programs, you want to go to program definitions and standards and make sure what you're thinking is in line with the restrictions. And your executive director and your supervisors can be helped. Myself and our external risk management provider, PW Wood, is also another source of help on this, right? So there are required standards, being on mission, documented needs, research-based. I'm not going to go through all of them, but there are many. And really, it shouldn't be hard. Most of the programs that we're doing now, it's just are good. But you do want to connect with your colleagues or call me. I will be happy to have a discussion with you about what you're thinking and working with your executive director. There are policies in place that may affect the things that you want to do, and you need to make sure that as a new person you want to connect with somebody in your association, make sure you're on point. There are requirements about how funding is used. There are HR policies, there are risk management policies that will have an impact. We can often find a way to work within the system, but we've got to have that conversation because it can be really serious when we make a mistake, right? You'll see that there's a formal statement, there's a checklist available for you, there's a short form to sort of go through, and you might want to do this with one of your new programs that you're now doing as a new staff person, and talk to your colleagues about what's in and what's out. Right? And this is just the short form, and it's pretty easy to step through. If you have a hole or two, if you have something that it's like, ooh, appropriate staffing, we're not quite there, typically no one of these is a deal killer unless it's off mission. But let's have a conversation because we might figure out a way to make it work. Right? Each association should be familiar with this. There is an association contract review process. This would be when you're doing a new contract or grant, but sometimes even just a new program, even if you're not getting external funding, if you're doing something new, you need to be checking with PW Wood. If they see a problem, they'll alert me to it. A local review, every contract has to be submitted to PW Wood, even if you're contracting with a building or you're contracting to use a table at the mall. Those things can have serious, massive financial implications for your association. And because all of the associations share a general liability insurance contract, it can have implications for the entire state. So this is why everything has to go to PW Wood to make sure that it has legal language in it that protects us. Right? So that was a super quick and dirty on program definitions and standards, but I do want to switch over to Eduardo Gonzales. And I will say, please do feel free to reach out to me. If I don't answer you really quickly, it's because I have a ton of email, and then call me if you have something that's urgent. Let's make sure that the work that you're doing is going to be covered by our insurance policy. So I'm gonna, we'll watch the chat box for questions, but we should turn it over to Eduardo.
This is a nice view with getting to see everybody on camera who's still there. And Eduardo's a co-host, so I believe should be able to share a screen. There he is.
Eduardo, we can see you. Can you send a wave?
Looks like you.
Oh, can you unmute yourself on your end? We have to unmute him.
Okay, gotcha. You think a co-host? Find you again. Okay. Oh,
Are you able to do it?
unmute. Oops, that might have been Carly.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, very good. Good morning, everyone. And let me, are you able to see my screen?
It's blue right now, Eduardo.
I think it's coming. Maybe not.
So what that might mean, because of the way my technology is set up here, I'm on a Wi-Fi that may not allow me to stream and speak at the same time. So Kim, I may have to ask you to share the presentation.
I can do that.
From the SharePoint.
All right, pull that up.
And so as that's coming up, I just want to say, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Eduardo Gonzales, Jr. I'm the statewide diversity specialist providing support, resources and guidance to our efforts around diversity and inclusion. You'll see that both my picture and Sarah's picture are up on this slide because we share responsibility for our work on diversity and compliance throughout the system. Sarah, predominantly and exclusively, primarily for our compliance efforts, which are around the federal guidelines that we are obligated to follow as a result of being a federally funded organization. And so we can go ahead and move to that next slide. I don't know if I can. Oh, all right. So this is a different presentation. I thought it was the 2017. Do you see the 2017 one up there? And the only reason I'm asking for the 2017 one is because I start with a diversity statement from our director included in our affirmative action, diversity and inclusion plan, which provides guidance around all of the compliance aspects and regulations that we are obligated to be in compliance with and honor in all of our work. The statement clearly identifies our commitment, affirms our commitment to diversity and inclusion throughout the state with the diverse communities that we work with, and really identifies how we are, how our efforts are really beyond tolerance and compliance to create a climate that's welcoming and inclusive of all. And so I wanted to start off with that statement because it's a statement that I have been encouraging folks to share as they are being asked questions as to our focus or emphasis on diversity and inclusion. It's really our emphasis on diversity and inclusion is a non-negotiable. It's something that we are, that's an integral part of our, I'm hearing an echo.
You, us, and I'm going to type the statement in.
An integral part of our work. And so when we talk about diversity within Extension, from a compliance perspective, we are absolutely and without doubt focused on race, gender, and ethnicity. That's statistics that we are required to keep with respect to our program participants, as well as our volunteers and in our staffing related to compliance are in fact related to race, gender, and ethnicity. And race, gender, and ethnicity are the basis of all of our compliance efforts. And beyond race, gender, and ethnicity, when we think about diversity, we can move to the next slide on this one. When we look at diversity, we're really looking at diversity also from a much broader perspective that's about multiple dimensions of identity, of who we are, that include primary dimensions, secondary dimensions, as well as organization and cultural dimensions of diversity. So in this respect, diversity is expanded to include more than just race, gender, and ethnicity. When we move into thinking about, and when we often talk about diversity, we often talk about diversity and inclusion. And we can move to the next slide. In this next slide, there's a broader definition of what inclusion is. Inclusion, the essence of inclusion is really how do we operationalize diversity? How do we make diversity matter? So that we're not just bringing diversity into the door for the purposes of representation, but really for really going beyond that to provide opportunities and create an environment and a culture in which that diversity thrives, in which that diversity can bring its talents, its gifts, its skills, insights, input to bear on the decisions that are made within an organization, whether it's in programming, whether it's in staffing, volunteer efforts, governance, and such. And so it's really about providing everyone within the organization the opportunity to contribute fully. And at the core of it, it's the valuing of dignity and respect for all throughout our organization and in our programs. Next slide. So oftentimes when we think about diversity or when diversity and inclusion is talked about, there's a couple of ways that it's talked about, and I've already started to do that. So one way that it's talked about is about compliance. And so many people, when they think about compliance, they think of diversity as something that we're forced to do or that we're obligated to do. And in many ways, that is what compliance is. Compliance means that it's the minimum requirements that we have to meet in order to ensure that we can hold on to, or we're honoring the agreement that we've entered into with the federal government. And so since we're receiving more than a penny in federal funding, we are required to be in compliance with all rules governing the inclusion of diverse populations in our programs. Another case is the values case, that diversity is the right thing to do, that it's the way in which we respond to the evolving needs and the evolving demographic changes that are occurring within the communities that we are working with. And so it's values driven. And then lastly, it's the business case. And the business case is probably the case that most attention gets because it's the bottom line here is the bottom line. It's dollars, it's profit. As a non-for-profit, this oftentimes is not the way in which we conduct or why we are interested in diversity. But the essence of it is that diversity is a smart thing to do, especially for us as an organization that receives federal funding, that's taxpayer funded, and as an organization that's looking to sustain itself over time. And so we can only do that by ensuring that our outreach is such that we are making sure that we are benefiting all segments of the community. Next slide. So some of the fundamentals of diversity and inclusion, and this one I'll just quickly go through, it's really willingness, readiness, and opportunity. What's our willingness to engage with diversity? What's our willingness to acknowledge where we're falling short of representing the communities in which we live and which we work in and which our organization serves? What's our readiness? How prepared are we? What are the skills that we have or the skills that we might need in order to have the readiness, both the individual personal readiness as well as the organizational readiness to address the issues, respond to the issues, and sometimes just acknowledge the issues that impact diversity and inclusion. And finally, opportunities. What are the opportunities that are provided for engagement across the different levels of the organization, so that when we're looking at diversity, we're not just thinking of diversity in certain programs, but across all of our programs and in our staffing as well. One thing that I think it's really important, and we've heard about this, we can move on to the next slide, and there's been a lot of talk about unconscious or implicit bias, and unconscious or implicit bias are the attitudes and the stereotypes that are ingrained in our brain, that we have very little control over, that these in fact have been put in our head because of what we're exposed to, what we haven't been exposed to, and it can very much get in the way of our ability to work across differences. And so one thing to bear in mind about unconscious and implicit bias is that they're automatic and involuntary, and oftentimes outside of our awareness. And so what researchers recommend is that we put ourselves in situations where we are amongst where there's diversity, because it's at that point where some of these blind spots that we have around diversity and differences can be revealed to us. And so unconscious and implicit bias is something that we talk about. You'll hear more about this in some of the professional development offerings that we have throughout the year. Let's move on to the next slide. And I'm sorry, I'm kind of speed racing through this because I know we're done at noon, but I just wanted to give you a basic understanding of what diversity and inclusion looks like and what's required of us at Extension. And so one of the things that that's also important here is skills, right? So cultural competence. Staff skills for success or skills for success were mentioned earlier. Diversity and inclusiveness is one of those skills. And so how do we continue to sharpen our skill set with respect to this? And these are just a couple of ways that we can be mindful or be thinking about diversity and building our own skills. Is that, valuing diversity is at the core of it. Having a humility and openness to discovering our blind spots, as I mentioned already. What are our own cultural biases? What are the biases that we've developed over time based on our lived experiences and our exposure or lack of exposure to diversity. Also, an awareness of dynamics that happen between and within groups, so that an understanding of the dynamics of power across groups is really important. Internalizing some of the cultural knowledge that we get when we are, in fact, in spaces and places where we're engaging across differences. And finally, and most importantly, is the developing of adaptations to diversity. It's moving beyond the one size fits all, and this is particularly important in our programming. How do we assess needs and identify strengths within communities that we have historically not worked with or not worked well with, and use that to develop adaptations to the programs that we offer or how we do programs. Next slide. And so some of this work is really individual work, and it involves really being honest about our own views about diversity, that some of our views about diversity are oftentimes, while we have very egalitarian ideals, some of the unconscious or implicit bias that we carry around may make its way out of who, may impact or may manifest themselves in our interactions. And so just being honest and owning that. Be an openness to learning and unlearning, especially as it relates to communities that have historically been marginalized, communities that have not had a wonderful experience with universities or research in general, and understanding how, some communities might be very suspect of work that's done in the name of research. And so that's really important as we work with African American communities, as we work with Native American communities, as we work with the LGBTQ community, the disabilities community. And so that is something that requires ongoing learning. An acknowledgement of our positions of power is really important, and privilege. Privilege is something that's been talked about a lot in the news lately, and it's a wonderful thing because I think as folks are starting to recognize places in which they experience privilege, they can work in using that privilege to create better organizations, better programs, and better engagement and interactions. Active learning is another part, encouraging feedback from others and being welcome to that, developing an empathy. We might not be a member of a particular marginalized group, but understanding that there's been some struggle or there's been some challenges, and using critical thinking to evaluate situations. Programmatically, there's a couple of things that we can also be doing. And some of this you will get as you have other folks from Cooperative Extension speak to you, especially as it relates to program development. We can move on to the next slide. Programmatic strategies include identifying populations. Who are the populations in your community? How are you using demographics to identify what communities exist? Because oftentimes, if they have not been a core part or central part of our programming at Extension, they become invisible communities, or invisible to us at least. They are not new communities. These are communities that have always been around. They're just communities we haven't always worked with. So thinking about the ways in which we use demographic data to identify the populations, the demographics of our communities. Identifying resources. Oftentimes we think about communities, marginalized communities, or communities that are underserved, are underrepresented, and we think about we think only about their struggles and their challenges, and we lose sight of the fact that these communities also have resiliency and strength. And so identifying what the resources of those communities are, identifying individuals who might be able to, who are kind of gatekeepers, and gatekeepers not in the negative connotation that it often has, but really individuals who can give you access to those communities, give you, vet you in some ways for those communities, because again, if we're coming in as an unknown entity, we're not going to be able to necessarily make any inroads if we're coming in cold. So we definitely need folks from the communities who are seen as natural leaders or established leaders who can help us get in there. And then listening. Don't show up and be the person who talks the most, the person who has the most to offer. Really listen to what the community is saying, what the group is saying, understand what their needs are, understand what their strengths are, and then community exposure. I often talk about this in terms of stepping out of our comfort zones. Going to communities or events that are sponsored in the communities by organizations that we're or groups that we're not members of, that are maybe cultural events that are sponsored in the community where we would otherwise not have a presence. Identifying what those events are, what those opportunities are, and what it might mean is that sometimes we're the only one. We might be the only one from our given background who's at that meeting, but it helps us to establish rapport. It helps us to establish some level of credibility and visibility. And it definitely requires us to step out of our comfort zone. And then finally, I share this particular slide, this next slide, because oftentimes we get trapped in our own heads, or we get trapped in our perceived powerlessness when it comes to affecting change around diversity and inclusion within our organization, within our programs, and really thinking about what is the discretionary power that you have in your given position. And you understand that many of you are new, and you bring a lot of skills, a great expansive skill set, and also experiences with diversity that are really valuable, that are really important. So allowing your voice to be heard and figuring out where you can make change happen, even if it's small change. And oftentimes that small change happens and can happen in those places where you have a sphere of influence, some locus of control, or that you can make a change in terms of how you address a group, how you include that group, perhaps even what you do in terms of your marketing and promotions. What language do you use? And so we know there's an evolving language around diversity, and so pronouns is a big one that we need to be mindful of. What are the pronouns that we use in terms of the promotional materials we have, how we address individuals, or how we seek to, honor dignity and respect of all. And so this discretionary power piece is one that I really implore you and challenge you to think about. What can you be doing differently in order to affect changes that promote greater diversity and inclusion in terms of our program? And lastly, I'm going to put in on this next slide is a gratuitous plug for a workshop that I facilitate with a number of colleagues called Opening Doors Personal and Professional Journey. It's a 3-day Understanding Differences workshop. And this is just one of many different professional development opportunities that are available. And this is a pretty intense workshop. So this is for individuals who really want to dig a little deeper and understand how the dynamics of power, privilege, and difference play out in our communities, in our society, and ultimately in our programs, in our organization. And so this is the next one. The next workshop offering is October 25th through the 27th at Camp Asbury, which is in Perry, New York, which is outside of, it's in the western part of the state. So you can get more information on this at our staff website, which you will probably be learning more about. There's a whole section in there that's specifically on diversity and inclusion, and there's more information about this and other related professional development opportunities, whether workshops or webinars, or just reading resources that can help expand your lens, diversity and inclusion lens. So I apologize for speed talking through this. Wanted to get in as much as I can. I am always available to answer questions. Email is eg36, or by phone. We'll make all of that available to you. But all of us have a responsibility to play in diversity and inclusion, and just think about what are you doing different, or what are you doing to ensure that we're honoring not just our compliance requirements, but also really the spirit of the law, which is about greater diversity, greater inclusion. Thank you.
Okay, are we back with sound here? Thank you, Eduardo. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Were you able to hear me?
Yes, we definitely were.
Okay,
your sound
all
was
right.
great. A lot of different components in this webinar, so thanks everyone for bearing with us. And Eduardo, sorry that we squished you there at the end with time, but I think you've got some really important points. And I'm hoping for everyone on the line that you've been at least created some awareness to the resources that are there, and that we're also here for you. So Eduardo is very approachable and available by email or phone, as well as the rest of us here in the room and our colleagues here in Extension Administration. So thank you very much, Eduardo. I appreciate that. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Paul. We'll give everyone who's on a chance to, if there's any lingering questions or anything we might have inspired in you today, which you may want to go find a little bit more about, or person to contact or program to attend. This Opening Doors is definitely a wonderful workshop to participate in, and it's offered a couple times a year in different locations, so you can keep an eye out for that. There's also scholarships to get involved with that, so let us know if you are interested. But plenty of other orientation opportunities and professional development opportunities out there. So we appreciate you being part of things. We're getting close to the end of our time. And I know many of you are also registered for CC 102, which will happen from 10:30 to 12 on Friday. So you've got all the information to connect with that. So we'll be seeing you on the Moodle, on the web, or feel free to contact any one of us. Thanks everybody for participating.
Thank you, Kim, for getting everybody together and keeping us on point, and we really appreciate it. And thanks for everybody showing up today.
Yeah, great showing, definitely. Okay, take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eduardo. I think you're on the recording.
Mhm.